Anybody here who did not experience an earthquake on Thursday? And what they tell us is that tomorrow there's going to be a significant eclipse of the sun. Two events that over which we have no control, but there is a higher power that does. And it reminds me that God, by whatever name you call God, is still in charge. The passage that Carol just read is from one of the, to be honest, more obscure books in the Bible, in the New Testament, the letter of James. There's even controversy about who James was. Jesus had two disciples named James. And in order to differentiate them, one is called James the Greater, the other is called James the Less. The book was written around 50 or 60 Christian era, which we used to call AD, which raises the question, was he even one of the two Jameses? Or was he another James who came along decades later? It is known that he was a contemporary of St. Paul, who clearly was not a direct disciple of Jesus, but was converted to Christianity decades later. It is known that he wrote in highly educated Greek, which leads to the conclusion that he was himself Greek. St. Paul was Roman. Both were Jews and both were contemporaries. It's less important to know his heritage than it is to know what he wrote and taught. Since he lived and wrote in the first century, he felt it necessary to define what the early Christians believed. One of the most recent inventions in our own world is the smartwatch. Anybody have one? Smartwatches tell time, but that's the least of what they do. They can monitor your heart rate, your body temperature, your blood oxygen levels. They can remind you to take your medication, call for emergency help, and stay in touch with your family, all among other things. And we need to be educated or trained to know how to use one of those things. Same was true with James. He knew it necessary to describe policies and fundamental beliefs for the early Christians. The book of James has 5 chapters. James makes 5 points. First was stand firm. If you think about it, it was the case that all Christians at that time were converts. And it was necessary to encourage converts to remain committed. And I think the same can be said of converts in our realm, in any realm. You can be absolutely gung-ho about your new thing. It might be that you've given up paganism for Christianity. It might be that you've decided to switch from Maxwell House to chock full of nuts. Doesn't matter. The point is that if you embrace something new, you need to stick with it. James said, whenever you face trials of any kind, consider it nothing but joy, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. That's a difficult challenge, which is why James encourages his readers or hearers to stand firm in the faith. We've all had at least one, probably more, experiences in our lifetimes when we had our faith tested. We may have been confronting a crisis, the loss of a loved one, a financial setback, breakup of a relationship. And sometimes these events are so powerful that they cause us to question our faith. Does God still love me? Or why did God allow this to happen to me? It's times like those when it is more important than ever to be strong in our faith. Pretty sure you've been there. I have, many times. Stand strong in your faith, and your faith will pull you through. Then James goes on to talk about being doers of the word. And some Bible scholars say that it is one of the places where James and Paul seem to part ways. Which is greater, faith or works? Paul tended to emphasize that all that was necessary for salvation was faith. All that was needed was faith. James, on the other hand, emphasized works. It's been a controversy in Christianity since day one and is still today, and probably will continue to be forever. A couple of verses from James. My brothers and sisters, what good is it if people, they say, have faith but do nothing to show it? Imagine a brother or sister who is naked and never has enough food to eat. Remember, I'm quoting from the Bible here. What if you said, James speaking, go in peace, stay warm, have a nice meal? What good is it if you don't actually give them something to eat? In the same way, faith is dead when it doesn't result in faithful activity. A few examples from today. We all are familiar with many different ministries right here at home in this church. We as a congregation participate in making lives better for our neighbors through Lunch Break, Family Promise, the Backpack Crew, Habitat for Humanity, and others. The Christian world is abundant with ministries which are dedicated to making lives better, and we as a congregation are active in many of them. Allow me a personal aside. Many years ago, many more than I can think, when I was much younger, and to be honest, more naive and idealistic, I thought I was going to change the world. For a decade, I was executive director of the Bowery Mission. And I think somewhere in the back of my mind, I thought I was going to eradicate alcoholic homelessness from the Bowery. Our ministry there was even more difficult because this was the time, some of you may remember, when deinstitutionalization was prominent. And the state of New York, if you don't know what that meant, it was a time when the government was literally discharging people from mental institutions and drug rehabilitation programs, giving them a suitcase and $20 and dropping them on a corner somewhere in Manhattan. That happened. It's true. Eventually, I came to the realization that the best I could do, the very best I could do, was to change the life of one person at a time. If you are an idealist and are committed to changing the world, by all means, go for it. But if you realistically note that you are able to help one person, go for that too. And remind yourself that you are still doing God's work. Which leads me to James' next chapter, next point, which is small things can change the world. Individuals can and have changed the world. First and foremost, of course, Jesus, Moses, so many others we could cite in our own lifetimes. Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, Pope John the 23rd, people of prayer and faith. I just said you can't change the world, and I'll continue to say that, but it is also true that a single person can have a major impact on the world, or a significant part of it. So James' lesson of both of those examples is, don't give up. Don't allow yourself to feel overwhelmed. Don't avoid doing something you believe in because you might fail. Finally, the passage from James which we opened with, which Carol read, pray for one another. I can't think of a more appropriate thought to leave with you for this one day when I'm here. Prayer is powerful and effective. We are a community, a family. We are bound to each other by bonds of friendship, by a common commitment to a set of ideals, by our God who saves us and blesses us. This is not just an obligation. We care for each other because we care for each other. The care we show to others makes the world a better place and comes back to rain blessings on us. One of the ways we care for each other is by praying. I can pray for you. You can pray for me. We can hold hands and pray together, and God answers prayer. I've said this down through the years. God answers prayers. Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is later. The prayers you offer must be consistent with God's design for the universe. You can't pray that God will stop the sun. Well, you can, but it won't happen. God will not grant a prayer that is counter to God's design. So, my parting words. Pray for each other. Pray for those who are members of our church family, who are ill, who need moral support, who are facing job problems, who are struggling for grades in school. Pray for them. Pray for people who don't have enough food, but give food to a feeding program. Pray for parts of the world that are at war. There are so many things. Pray for each other. Allow the Spirit of the living God to fall afresh on you. Pray for each other.